On January 9, 1943, 2 days after Nikola Tesla was found dead in room 330-27 of the New Yorker hotel, agents from the Office of Alien Property arrived at the door. They did not knock. They seized everything. 80 trunks of documents, notebooks filled with diagrams, unfinished patents, correspondence with governments on 3 continents. The accumulated work of a man who had spent 50 years rewriting the rules of electricity, energy, and long-distance communication. 3 days later, Dr. John G. Trump, an MIT electrical engineer working under contract with the U.S. military, was given the task of evaluating those documents. His conclusion? Nothing of value. Speculative, philosophical, not worth pursuing. That was the public statement. But when those trunks were finally shipped to Belgrade a decade later, only 60 arrived. 20 trunks, gone. No shipping manifest, no explanation, no record of what was inside them. And some of Tesla's patents, filed under his own name, in his own country of citizenship, are still classified today. 83 years after his death. The question is not whether Tesla was a genius. That is documented beyond dispute. The question is, what did he build that someone decided the world should never see? Nikola Tesla was born on July 11, 1856, in the village of Smiljan, a rural corner of what was then the Austrian Empire, now modern-day Croatia. According to family accounts, he arrived during a lightning storm. The midwife called it a bad omen. His mother replied that it meant he would be a child of light. She was closer to the truth than she knew. Tesla studied electrical engineering at the Polytechnic Institute in Graz, Austria, then at the University of Prague. By his early 20s, he was already sketching designs for alternating current motors in his notebooks, a concept so far ahead of established science that his professors told him it was impossible. They said alternating current could not be harnessed for mechanical work. Tesla did not argue. He built it instead. On June 6, 1884, at the age of 28, Tesla stepped off a steamship in New York City. He carried 4 cents in his pocket, a book of his own poems, a few pages of calculations, and a letter of introduction to Thomas Edison, the most powerful inventor in America. Edison hired him on the spot. The partnership lasted less than a year. The 2 men had fundamentally different approaches to science. Edison solved problems through brute repetition, thousands of experiments, thousands of failures, until something worked by trial. Tesla solved problems in his head. He could design an entire machine in his imagination, rotate it, stress test it, refine every component, then build one prototype that functioned on the first attempt. His assistants later confirmed this. Tesla worked from memory. He rarely needed a second draft. Edison and Tesla also disagreed on something far more consequential than method. They disagreed on the future of electricity itself. Edison had built his empire on direct current, DC. It was expensive. It was short range. It required a power station every mile. And at the voltages needed for industrial use, it was lethal. Tesla had designed something better. Alternating current, AC, cheaper to transmit, capable of traveling hundreds of miles over a single wire, safer at scale. But having the superior technology did not mean winning. Not in the 1880s. Not when Edison had the capital, the political connections, and the willingness to publicly electrocute stray animals to convince the press that AC was a death sentence. What Tesla needed was someone willing to bet against Edison. That bet came from George Westinghouse, a fellow inventor who had made a fortune from railroad air brakes. Westinghouse bought Tesla's AC patents and offered a royalty contract, $2.50 for every horsepower of alternating current electricity sold. If that contract had survived, Tesla would have become the wealthiest individual in the history of the United States. The math is not complicated. Every motor, every generator, every power grid running on AC, royalties flowing into one man's account. It did not survive. Westinghouse's company overextended. Investors panicked. Debt mounted. Westinghouse went to Tesla personally and explained that the royalty clause would bankrupt the company, the same company carrying AC to the world. Tesla tore up the contract, not renegotiated to a smaller figure, not converted into a lump sum, torn in half, in front of the man who owed him everything. He walked away from what today would be worth billions because he believed the technology reaching the public mattered more than his personal fortune. On May 1st, 1893, at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, 160,000 light bulbs powered by Tesla's alternating current system turned night into day. 6 months later, Westinghouse won the contract to harness Niagara Falls for AC power generation. Tesla designed the dynamos, the motors, and the layout of the entire plant. Edison had lost. AC became the standard. It remains the standard 133 years later. But Tesla was already looking past wires. In a 1904 interview, he described a system capable of transmitting power without any physical connection, using the Earth's ionosphere as a conductor. And not just power, information. He described a device small enough to carry in a pocket that could receive news, data, and messages from any location on the planet. That was 1904, 122 years ago, over a century before anyone held a smartphone. Tesla was not speaking in metaphors. He had already begun testing. In 1899, he built a laboratory in Colorado Springs with funding from John Jacob Astor IV, a barn-like structure topped with a 142-foot pole and a copper sphere housing a Tesla coil measuring 52 feet in diameter. Residents of Colorado Springs documented what happened next. Sparks jumped between the ground and their feet. Light bulbs within 100 feet of the tower glowed without being connected to any power source. Horses with metal shoes bolted from their stalls from the stray current running through the earth. In one experiment, Tesla planted light bulbs in a field surrounded by a 50-foot square of wire. When electricity was transmitted through the wire, the bulbs lit up, with no direct connection to the power source. After 8 months, Tesla announced he had proven wireless power transmission was feasible. He never published the full evidence, but this was Nikola Tesla at the height of his credibility. His word carried the weight of documented success. He returned to New York with a plan that would have changed the architecture of civilization. What happened to that plan is where the story breaks. There is a photograph from that Colorado laboratory. Tesla sits in a wooden chair, reading calmly, while arcs of artificial lightning crack across the room in every direction. Millions of volts. The air itself turned white with discharge. And he sits there, still, unbothered, as if electricity were the weather, and he had learned long ago not to flinch at thunder. That photograph tells you everything about the kind of mind that designed what came next. A man who did not fear the forces he was handling, who believed he could bend the fundamental infrastructure of the planet to carry power without wires, information without cables, energy without cost. The question was never whether Tesla could think at that scale. The question was whether the financial machinery around him would allow it to exist. In 1900, J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in America, invested $150,000 in Tesla's next project. That is approximately $5.6 million in today's currency. Morgan wanted one thing: monopoly control over wireless telegraphy. If Tesla could send messages without wires, Morgan wanted to own the system. Tesla wanted something larger, a global network, towers transmitting both information and energy to any receiver, anywhere, at minimal cost. He bought 200 acres on Long Island's North Shore. He hired architect Stanford White, and he built Wardenclyffe Tower, 187 feet tall, a 55-ton dome of conductive metals at the top, a root system of iron pipes reaching 120 feet into the Earth's crust, designed to use the planet itself as a transmission medium. Then on December 12, 1901, Guglielmo Marconi sent the first wireless telegraph signal across the Atlantic Ocean. Morgan's exclusive advantage gone in a single transmission. The 1901 stock market crash followed. Building costs doubled overnight, and Tesla, in a decision that would shadow his reputation for the rest of his life, told reporters he had received signals from another planet while working in Colorado. He was wrong about the source. In 1996, researchers confirmed the signals originated from the interaction between Jupiter's moon Io and the planet's magnetic field. A real electromagnetic event misidentified. But in 1901, the headlines did not say misidentified. They said, Tesla hears Martians. His credibility fractured. Morgan pulled his funding. And according to multiple documented accounts, he did not stop there. Morgan used his influence across the banking and investment community to ensure that no one else would fund Tesla's wireless power research. Not a single institution, not a single individual. Tesla spent his own savings, month after month. The tower stood half-finished on the Long Island shore. By 1905, work slowed to nothing. By 1906, Wardenclyffe was abandoned. In 1917, the tower was demolished, sold for scrap metal, reportedly to settle a $20,000 debt at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Some military officials claimed it posed a navigation risk for German submarines during the war. But the scrap explanation does not account for one thing. The blueprints for Wardenclyffe Tower were never recovered. Not in Tesla's files, not in government inventories, not in the Waldorf's records. The detailed plans for the most ambitious energy project of the early 20th century, designed by the man who built the Niagara Falls power plant, vanished. In Tesla's notes on wireless power transmission, the subject he had researched obsessively for over 15 years, were not found among any documents later seized by the US government. That absence is not speculation. It is on record in the FBI's own declassified inventories. I spent 3 weeks on this story, reading FBI files released under FOIA, cross-referencing Tesla's patent filings with the government's seized document inventories, comparing what was listed with what was missing. What stays with me is not the conspiracy angle. It is simpler than that. Tesla tore up a contract worth billions because he believed the technology mattered more than his bank account. And the system he trusted to carry that work forward, the investors, the institutions, the regulators, each one, in sequence, turned away. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a documented pattern. Financial self-interest overriding scientific progress. And it did not stop with Tesla. On January 7, 1943, a maid at the New Yorker hotel ignored a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door of room 3327. She found Nikola Tesla dead in his bed. He was 86 years old. The coroner ruled coronary thrombosis, a blood clot in the heart. 2 days later, agents from the Office of Alien Property arrived and seized 80 trunks of material. Tesla was a naturalized U.S. citizen, not an alien. The Office of Alien Property had no clear legal authority over his estate, but there was a war on, and the inventor who had sold preliminary plans for a particle beam weapon to the Soviet Union in 1939, $25,000 on record, had just died with a hotel room full of documents. Jurisdiction was not the priority. Tesla's nephew, Sava Kosanovic, the Yugoslav ambassador to the United States, arrived at the hotel shortly after. He later stated that some technical papers and a black notebook with several hundred pages, some marked government, were already missing before federal agents entered the room. This was never confirmed. It was never investigated. And it was never denied. Dr. John G. Trump evaluated the documents in 3 days, 80 trunks, decades of technical work from a man who held over 300 patents. 3 days. His public report? Nothing of value, speculative and philosophical. His private comments to colleagues, according to later accounts, Some material bordered on dangerous speculation. After Trump's evaluation, Brigadier General L.C. Craigie at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base launched a classified initiative, Project Nick, to test the feasibility of Tesla's particle beam weapon concept. The project was funded, research was conducted. The findings were never published. In 1952, Tesla's remaining documents were shipped to Belgrade. 60 trunks arrived, 20 did not. And through the 1950s, while Western researchers were denied access to the Tesla archive in Belgrade under Tito's regime, Soviet scientists were granted unrestricted access to every document in the collection. In 1960, Soviet Premier Khrushchev announced publicly that the USSR was developing a new weapon of extraordinary power. No details were provided. The only two nations with confirmed access to Tesla's particle beam research, the United States and the Soviet Union, both conducted classified directed energy testing programs in the decades that followed. Coincidence requires those two facts to be unrelated. The timeline does not support that conclusion. The clean version of this story is that Tesla's later years produced nothing workable. An aging mind, grand claims without evidence, a man who fell in love with a pigeon and talked about Martian signals. Parts of that are true. Tesla did become isolated. He did make claims that could not be publicly verified. But the clean version requires you to look past several documented facts, not the rumors, the records. In 1934, the New York Times reported that Tesla had developed what he called the Teleforce, a concentrated particle beam weapon capable of disabling aircraft at 250 miles. He attempted to sell the concept to Allied governments. The Soviet Union paid. The United States did not respond until after he was dead. In 1951, the Invention Secrecy Act became permanent federal law. Under this act, the Pentagon, NASA, the CIA, and any federal agency can review patent applications and issue secrecy orders blocking any invention deemed a potential threat. The inventor is prohibited from discussing the work with anyone, including legal counsel. Violation is a federal crime. As of the most recent public reporting, over 6,000 patents in the United States are currently held under active secrecy orders. The categories are not disclosed. The criteria for classification are not defined in any public statute. That number is verified by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Tesla was not the only inventor whose work disappeared at the intersection of breakthrough technology and institutional resistance. Stanley Meyer filed a patent for a water fuel cell engine in 1998. He died on March 20th of that year after telling associates he had been poisoned by men posing as Belgian investors. The coroner ruled it a cerebral aneurysm. His patent application and his prototype, gone. No public record of where they went. These are not the same case, but they follow the same sequence. An invention that threatens an entrenched economic structure, a disruption, financial, legal, or physical. Then silence. The files sealed, the prototypes missing, and the official conclusion, nothing of value. Not a conspiracy, a pattern, exposed not by theory, but by the gaps in the record itself. Tesla once described the Earth as a living conductor, a circuit capable of carrying energy to every point on its surface without a single wire strung between them. That was not poetry, it was an engineering proposal, backed by experiments, tested in Colorado, designed into blueprints that no longer exist. 120 years later, the phone you are holding charges on a wireless pad, slowly, a few inches from the source, and only if you place it in exactly the right position. The distance between Tesla's vision and the reality you live in is not a question of physics alone. The alternating current system he designed in his 20s powers every grid on the planet. The radio technology built on his patents carries every signal you receive. The principles he documented form the foundation of the electrical infrastructure of the modern world. That is not disputed by anyone. That is the baseline. What is disputed, what remains classified, sealed, and unaccounted for, is what came after. The 30 years of wireless power research, the particle beam schematics, the missing notebooks, the 20 trunks that never arrived in Belgrade. In 2016, under the Freedom of Information Act, the FBI released approximately 250 Tesla-related documents. Another batch followed in 2018. Some contained references to wireless transmission research. Some referenced the Teleforce weapon. Some remain classified. Today, in 2026, Tesla died alone in a hotel room he could barely afford. 86 years old, surrounded by pigeons he fed from the windowsill. The man who lit up the Columbian Exposition, the man who harnessed Niagara Falls, the man who designed the electrical system that runs your world, died in debt, in silence, in a room the size of a closet. And 3 days later, the government arrived to take what was left. The question this story leaves behind is not whether Tesla was right about everything. He was not. The Martian signals were Jupiter. Some of his later claims were beyond what any prototype could deliver. But wireless power, the project he spent 3 decades on, the one Morgan crushed, the one whose blueprints were never recovered, the one whose remaining files are still sealed, that is not a fantasy from a declining mind. That is an unfinished equation. And the data does not say it failed. The data says it was stopped. If this investigation left you with a question you did not have before, put it in the comments. Not the answer, the question. That is where the next one starts. And if someone you know still thinks Tesla was just the guy with the coil and the lightning, send them this. Not because it proves anything, because it shows them what the record looks like when the proof has been removed.